They called her kid with snickers and eye rolls, dismissing her presence at the elite shooting range like she was nothing but a joke. The freshman's hands trembled slightly as she loaded her rifle, aware of the mockery from the upperclassmen who believed she'd never hit the impossible 4,000-meter target that had defeated even their best marksmen. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The Afghan sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless sky as Special Agent Meredith Mercury Caldwell remained motionless on her perch. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on her left shoulder, the fabric now stiff and dark. 2 miles away, through the wavering heat, stood the compound, her target oblivious to the invisible threat, watching from the distant ridge. Meredith's breathing remained measured, despite the pain. Her mind calculated variables most snipers would consider impossible. Wind speed shifting between 23 and 27 knots, humidity at 17%, barometric pressure, and even the rotation of the Earth itself. The sandstorm whipping across the barren landscape only complicated matters, but she had accounted for everything. Target still in position, she whispered into her comm unit, her voice betraying none of the agony radiating from her shoulder. Colonel Jackson Wells's voice crackled in response. "Confirm when ready, Mercury." The CIA operative made microscopic adjustments to her custom Macmillan TAC 338 rifle, the weapon an extension of her body after years of partnership. Her finger hovered near the trigger as she waited for the perfect moment between heartbeats. The world narrowed to her scope, the crosshairs and the distant figure. She exhaled slowly and squeezed. The rifle bucked against her wounded shoulder. 2.8 seconds later, the target dropped. A clean shot at 2,800 meters, a distance most military snipers would deem impossible. "Target neutralized," she reported clinically, already shifting to assess for threats. "Confirmed," Wells responded, his tone equally detached. "Clean work as always, Mercury. Extraction in 30 minutes at the secondary location." What the colonel couldn't see was the subtle change in Meredith's expression. This mission, this perfect, impossible shot, would be her last. The decision had crystallized during those long hours of waiting, blood slowly draining from her body. 13 years of service, of becoming death from a distance, had exacted its toll. As darkness fell over the Afghan mountains, she meticulously disassembled her rifle, each component disappearing into her specialized pack. The weapon that had become famous in classified circles would never be fired by her hands again. The operative known as Mercury moved like a ghost through the growing darkness, leaving no trace of her presence. By morning, she would be someone else entirely. A woman walking away from shadows toward a life where calculations would solve equations, not end lives. Colonel Wells and the agency would search, of course, but Meredith Mercury Caldwell had learned from the best how to disappear. She had already slipped into the first moments of her new existence, carrying only what couldn't be abandoned: her skills, her memories, and the algorithms that had made her legendary. Fort Liberty had transformed overnight. The once ordinary military base now buzzed with an energy that rivaled the Olympic Games. Flags from 24 nations fluttered in the morning breeze as the annual international sniper competition prepared to begin. Bleachers lined the parade grounds, filled with military personnel, defense contractors, and international media. Camera crews jostled for position, while security personnel maintained a watchful perimeter. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone strode confidently through the crowd, his decorated uniform drawing admiring glances. The commander of the elite Phantom Sniper Unit moved with the assurance of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. "This year, we're not just competing, we're making history," Stone announced to the gathered reporters, his voice carrying across the assembly area. "The current world record stands at 3,540 meters. By the end of this competition, that record will fall." He smiled for the cameras, perfectly comfortable in the spotlight. 20 yards away, Brigadier General Thomas Rayburn watched the spectacle with thinly veiled skepticism. The senior officer leaned against the tactical vehicle, arms crossed over his chest. "Always the showman," Rayburn muttered to his aide. "Let's see if his shooting matches his talking." As the general spoke, several heads turned toward the eastern edge of the parade ground. A slender woman with auburn hair walked purposefully across the open space, seemingly oblivious to the military pageantry surrounding her. Professor Meredith Caldwell moved with the fluid grace of an athlete, though her modest business attire and stack of academic papers marked her as faculty, not military. The mathematics professor from Fort Liberty University kept her eyes forward, acknowledging the occasional greeting with a polite nod, but maintaining her pace. Few of the gathered spectators would have guessed that 13 years earlier, she had made a shot that still haunted the nightmares of certain intelligence officials. A junior officer stepped aside to let her pass, his eyes lingering on her face with a flicker of recognition that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Meredith noticed, but gave no indication. She had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility in plain sight. As she reached the university building at the edge of the competition grounds, she paused briefly, her gaze sweeping across the assembled snipers and their equipment. For just a moment, her eyes locked with Stone's across the distance. The lieutenant colonel frowned slightly before turning back to his admirers. Meredith entered the building, the heavy door closing behind her with a solid thud. The competition would begin tomorrow, but the real contest, the one that would determine far more than a trophy, had already begun. Meredith Mercury Caldwell's office at Fort Liberty University was a testament to her dual nature. Mathematical formulas covered 3 whiteboards, complex equations scrawled in different colored markers, while stacks of academic journals created precarious towers on her desk. Yet, amid this scholarly chaos, everything had its place, a precision that spoke to her former life. "So, the bullet doesn't just travel in a straight line?" asked James, a freshman cadet with earnest eyes and a perpetually confused expression. "Nothing in this world travels in a straight line," Meredith replied, taking a piece of chalk and drawing a graceful arc on the small blackboard she kept for demonstrations. "Gravity pulls it downward from the moment it leaves the barrel." The professor moved with a fluid economy of motion, her posture revealing the athletic discipline beneath her academic exterior. She sketched a diagram showing wind vectors and elevation angles, her hand steady and confident. "At 500 meters, these factors might add inches to your deviation. At 2,000, they add feet," she explained, briefly remembering calculating these same variables while lying prone on a rocky outcrop, blood seeping from her shoulder. 13 years ago, in Afghanistan, James leaned forward, struggling with the concepts. But how can anyone possibly account for all of this in the field? The mathematics professor smiled patiently. Practice, mathematics, and instinct. She tapped the board where she'd written the Coriolis effect equation. "This one is particularly important. The rotation of the Earth itself affects your bullet's path on long-distance shots." That seems excessive," the cadet admitted. "Perhaps," Meredith said, her voice softening. "But understanding these principles might save your life someday, or the lives of those depending on you." She didn't add that she'd once made these calculations under enemy fire, or that the perfect application of these formulas had ended lives rather than saved them. Outside the window, a black SUV with government plates idled in the faculty parking lot. Inside sat a man whose rigid posture and vigilant gaze marked him as military or intelligence, not academic. His eyes never left the professor's office window. "The mathematics seems impossible," James said, gathering his books. "The impossible just takes a little longer to calculate," she replied with a hint of a smile, an old saying from her operative days. As the young man left, Meredith turned back to her equations, unaware of being watched. Her hand absently touched her shoulder, where an old wound sometimes ached when rain was coming. A physical reminder of a past life that, despite her best efforts, was beginning to catch up with her. The sharp crack of rifle fire from the nearby range sliced through the afternoon quiet. Meredith Mercury Caldwell's body reacted before her mind could process the sound. In one fluid motion, she dropped behind her desk, her heartbeat maintaining a steady 60 beats per minute, despite the adrenaline surge. Her right hand swept instinctively to her hip, fingers searching for the familiar grip of a weapon that hadn't been there for 13 years. 1 second passed, then 2, then 3. The professor blinked, reality washing over her like cold water. The sounds weren't enemy fire, but merely cadets practicing at the Fort Liberty range. She wasn't in Afghanistan or Ukraine anymore. With a deep breath, she rose from her crouched position, smoothing her blouse as if nothing had happened. Thankfully, no students had witnessed the momentary lapse. Old habits, she murmured to herself, settling back into her chair. The equations on her whiteboard, ballistic trajectories, and wind compensation formulas suddenly seemed trivial compared to when she had calculated such variables with lives at stake. Her phone vibrated against the desk, dancing across a stack of ungraded papers. The screen displayed a name she hadn't expected to see: Colonel Jackson Wells. 13 years since their last operation, yet he still had a way of appearing precisely when the past threatened to resurface. "Caldwell," she answered, her voice neutral despite the tension coiling in her stomach. "He's back, Mercury." Wells's voice carried the same authoritative tone she remembered from countless mission briefings. No pleasantries, straight to operational status. "Your record is about to fall." Her grip tightened on the phone. Only one person would be gunning for her record: Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone and his Phantom Sniper Unit. The man had been boasting to anyone who would listen about shattering the world record for a confirmed kill. "The Kiev algorithm is resurfacing," Wells continued, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Stone thinks he's found it. Or at least, Axiom Defense thinks they've reconstructed it." Caldwell closed her eyes, memories flooding back. The weight of her custom rifle against her shoulder, the metallic taste of fear, the sound of Michael Chen's last breath as he saved both her and the algorithm. "I'm out, Jackson," she said firmly. "Have been for 13 years. "Tell that to the people watching your cabin," he replied. "You were never out, Mercury. Just dormant." As she ended the call, Meredith knew her carefully constructed academic life was unraveling. Stone's ambitions and the reemergence of the Kiev algorithm were pulling her back into a world of shadows and crosshairs she had fought desperately to escape. Meredith Mercury Caldwell waited until the hallway emptied before sliding her hand beneath her desk, feeling for the hidden pressure switch. The oak panel in her bookcase clicked open, revealing a small compartment invisible to casual observers. Inside lay 2 items she'd never displayed publicly: a weathered commendation letter with Operation Kiev 2008 embossed in faded gold lettering, and beside it, the Intelligence Star, a medal few outside the intelligence community would recognize. She ran her fingers over the metal surface, memories flooding back with tactile precision. This text calls and clicks the great panel open, revealing a small compartment invisible to casual observers. Inside lay 2 items she'd never displayed publicly: a weathered commendation letter with Operation Kiev 2008 embossed in faded gold lettering, and beside it, the Intelligence Star, a medal few outside the intelligence community would recognize. She ran her fingers over the metal surface, memories flooding back with tactile precision. The weight of it felt heavier than its physical mass suggested, laden with the consequences of that mission. Across campus in the faculty lounge, 3 professors huddled around the television. Breaking news showed satellite imagery of Russian troop movements near the Ukrainian border, the terrain achingly familiar to Meredith. "The rolling hills and dense terrible business," said Dr. Harrison, the history department chair. "Have you ever been to that part of the world, Meredith?" She took a measured sip of coffee, buying seconds to compose her response. The truth, that she'd spent weeks in those forests, that she'd watched through her scope as dawn broke over Kiev's golden domes, remained locked behind years of practiced secrecy. "I've traveled widely," she replied, the practiced vagueness of her answer concealing volumes. "Beautiful country," Harrison nodded, satisfied with her mundane response, unaware that Ukraine represented both her greatest professional achievement and her most devastating personal loss. The mathematics professor returned her attention to the screen, where a reporter gestured to a map highlighting strategic border positions. Meredith mentally corrected the reporter's pronunciation of several Ukrainian towns, another small tell of her hidden past she'd learned to suppress. Back in her office, she returned the medal to its hiding place, but kept the commendation out, studying the carefully worded document that revealed nothing of the mission's true nature. The operation had pioneered the application of the Kiev algorithm, mathematics that had changed the face of warfare and cost lives, good lives. She traced the official seal with her fingertip, remembering Michael Chen's face in their final moments together. His daughter Rebecca was somewhere on this very base now, unaware of how her father had died, saving not just Meredith, but the algorithm itself. The professor closed the hidden compartment, the soft click returning her to her present identity. Ukraine had made her a legend. But legends, she knew better than most, were built on sacrifice few would ever comprehend. Meredith Caldwell waited until campus fell quiet before retrieving her office chair's false bottom. Her fingers worked with practiced precision, muscle memory from a life she'd officially abandoned. Inside lay a weathered flash drive, unremarkable to the casual observer, but containing fragments of the most dangerous mathematical equation in modern warfare. The KV algorithm, Kiev's legacy, appeared as innocuous academic research on extreme ballistics trajectories. In reality, it was the mathematical key that had once allowed her to make that impossible shot in Afghanistan. 13 nations would kill to possess it in its complete form. "Just academic curiosities now," she whispered, sliding the drive into her laptop. The equations scrolled across her screen, beautiful in their elegance, terrifying in their implications. She had published sanitized versions in peer-reviewed journals, carefully scrubbed of their lethal potential, maintaining her cover as merely a brilliant mathematician. The following morning, Meredith sat in a corner booth at Patriots Coffee, 2 blocks from campus. She nursed a cooling Americano while watching Colonel Jackson Wells approach. The years had added silver to his temples, but hadn't diminished his military bearing. "Professor," he greeted, sliding into the seat opposite her. His smile never reached his eyes. "Cut the formalities, Jackal," she replied, using his old field designation. "What's so urgent?" Wells leaned forward. "Someone breached the outer firewall of the Longshot archives 3 days ago. They were looking for your work." Her cup paused halfway to her lips. "Impossible." Meredith's eyes narrowed. "Richard Keller's outfit? They're barely 5 years old, and already have 9-figure Pentagon contracts." Wells stirred his coffee methodically. "They've been courting Stone, feeding his ego, promising to help him break your record. He doesn't know it was me." "No, but Axiom suspects. They've reconstructed 70% of the algorithm from your published papers and Stone's field data." The professor's expression hardened. "Stone isn't me. The algorithm requires human judgment, intuition alongside calculation. That's what makes this worse," Wells replied. "They're not just using Stone to validate their reconstruction. They're using him as the human component in a new weapons system. Autonomous long-range targeting," Meredith whispered, the implications crystallizing. "With none of the ethical safeguards we built in." Wells nodded grimly. "Axiom selling to the highest bidders. Stone's just the American face of it." Meredith stared out the window, watching students cross the quad. Young, innocent, unaware of the deadly calculations that could reshape warfare. "What do you need from me, Jackson? Come back, just for this, before Stone breaks your record with a compromised algorithm." Her eyes met his. "And if I refuse, Then pray someone else can stop what's coming. Colonel Jackson Wells slid a manila envelope across the cafe table. "Two things," he said, his voice low despite the ambient chatter. "First, an official invitation to consult on the competition. Second," he tapped the envelope, "something you need to see." Meredith Caldwell opened it cautiously, finding the expected credentials and paperwork. But beneath them lay something that made her breath catch. A faded photograph, its edges worn from years of handling. The image showed a tactical team in Kiev, most faces deliberately obscured with black marker, except for two, her own younger face, and beside her, Lieutenant Michael Chen. "Michael!" she whispered, running her finger over his image. 13 years had passed, but the memory remained razor-sharp. His quick smile, his steady hands on the spotter scope, the way he'd pushed her clear of the explosion. The explosion that had saved the algorithm, but cost him everything. "There's more," Wells said, nodding toward a handwritten note tucked behind the photo. Caldwell unfolded it, her eyes widening as she read. "Rebecca Chen is at Fort Liberty, in sniper training?" She looked up sharply. "Michael's daughter? 22 years old, 5th Special Forces, top of her class in ballistics and electronic warfare." The colonel sipped his coffee. "She has no idea what her father really did. Believes he died in a training accident." "You're playing with fire, Jackson," Meredith said, her voice hardening. "Bringing her here, now, with everything that's happening?" "I didn't bring her. Pure coincidence." Wells leaned forward. "But I don't believe in coincidences, Mercury. Neither do you." The mathematics professor closed her eyes briefly, calculating variables beyond numbers: duty, risk, legacy. When she opened them again, her decision was made. Does she look like him? His eyes, his determination. Wells stood, leaving money for the coffee. "She's been asking questions about advanced ballistics that sound familiar. Too familiar." Caldwell carefully returned the photo to the envelope. "You're using her as bait, just like you're using me. I'm giving you both a chance to finish what started in Kiev." Wells adjusted his jacket. "The algorithm was never meant to be weaponized. You know that better than anyone." As he walked away, Meredith remained seated, staring at the envelope. The daughter of the man who'd saved her life was now unknowingly walking into the same web of secrets and danger. History was repeating itself, with a new generation caught in the crosshairs. "Damn you, Jackson," she whispered, tucking the envelope into her bag. The weight of it felt like lead against her side, heavier than any rifle she'd ever carried. Fort Liberty's parade grounds had transformed overnight, now adorned with the flags of 24 nations fluttering in the gentle breeze. The international sniper competition had officially begun, drawing elite marksmen from across the globe. Navy SEALs, Israeli commandos, British SAS, and Russian Spetsnaz among them. Media crews jostled for position as military bands played, and dignitaries delivered opening remarks. Meredith Mercury Caldwell stood at the back of the crowd, consultant badge hanging around her neck. She scanned the assembly with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years observing without being observed. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone and his Phantom sniper team occupied prime positions near the front, their posture radiating the unmistakable confidence of men who believed victory was already theirs. The mathematics professor noted how Stone occasionally leaned to whisper something to his spotter, Davis, both men chuckling afterward. Brigadier General Thomas Rayburn stood on the stage alongside other senior officials, his expression betraying none of the skepticism he had shown earlier about Stone's boasts. The general's eyes occasionally swept over the crowd, pausing briefly when they found Caldwell. "Professor Caldwell, what a pleasant surprise." The voice came from behind her, smooth and corporate. She turned to find Richard Keller extending his hand. The Axiom Defense Systems executive wore an impeccably tailored suit that seemed out of place among the uniforms and tactical gear. "Mr. Keller," she replied, accepting the handshake with a firm grip. "I wasn't aware defense contractors had such interest in marksmanship competitions." "We go where innovation happens," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Your work on extreme long-range ballistics caught our attention years ago. Purely theoretical, of course, but remarkably applicable. Caldwell maintained her neutral expression despite the implied knowledge in his words. Mathematics has many applications. Indeed, Keller glanced toward Stone's team. Some of your equations regarding atmospheric compensation at distances beyond 3,000 meters are particularly fascinating, almost as if they were field-tested. Pure theory requires rigorous modeling, she countered, already calculating how much he might know about the Kiev algorithm. Axiom would value your consultation on certain projects, he said, handing her a business card. We believe your academic perspective could be invaluable. I'll keep that in mind, she replied, pocketing the card as the opening ceremony concluded. As Keller departed, Caldwell noticed a brief exchange of glances between him and Stone. The connection was subtle but unmistakable. Whatever game was being played here, the former operative realized, extended far beyond a simple marksmanship competition. Meredith Mercury Caldwell's eyes narrowed as she scanned the Russian contingent. Among the uniformed competitors, one man stood apart, not in appearance but in bearing. While the others relaxed between events, this one maintained perfect situational awareness, his gaze systematically sweeping the grounds every 90 seconds. Military posture, but intelligence mindset. She'd bet her pension he reported to Moscow Center, not the Russian army. She slipped away from the opening ceremony, fingers hovering over her phone. The watchmaker protocol would alert her former agency to potential hostile intelligence presence, but activating it would create ripples. The professor hesitated, then pocketed her device. Too soon. She needed concrete evidence before potentially exposing herself. Professor Caldwell, a competition official, approached. The qualifying round is about to begin. Your consultant badge gives you access to the observer platform. From her elevated position, Meredith studied each team methodically. The Israelis moved with practiced efficiency. The British team maintained stoic professionalism, but her attention kept returning to Lieutenant Colonel Stone and his spotter Davis. Stone's technique was flawless: breathing control, trigger discipline, follow-through. Yet something felt rehearsed, as if he were performing for an audience beyond the judges. When he executed a perfect shot sequence at 800 meters, adjusting for a crosswind that hadn't yet manifested, she leaned forward. The wind flag twitched 3 seconds later, confirming his adjustment had been premature. Impressive anticipation, murmured a voice beside her. Richard Keller from Axiom had appeared, binoculars trained on Stone's position. Or he knew something we didn't, she replied carefully. Keller smiled thinly. Mathematics at work, Professor. Isn't that your specialty? She maintained her academic persona, discussing wind patterns and probability, while her mind calculated a different equation, one involving axiom, Stone, and algorithms that shouldn't exist outside classified vaults. As the day progressed, she cataloged each competitor's performance, but kept returning to Stone. His shooting was beyond textbook. It was algorithmic. Each adjustment, each breath cycle, followed patterns she recognized from her own past. When the Russian she'd marked earlier conferred briefly with Colonel Dmitry Vulov near the refreshment tent, she casually repositioned herself within earshot, catching fragments, confirmation of the asset, and demonstration tomorrow. The former operative felt cold certainty settle in her stomach. This wasn't just a competition. It was becoming an auction floor, with the Kiev algorithm as the prize. And judging by Stone's performance, someone had already started bidding. The scoreboard displayed the day's final results as competitors dispersed across the range. Meredith Mercury Caldwell gathered her notes, satisfied with the data she'd collected on wind patterns and shooter behaviors. As she tucked her notebook into her bag, a shadow fell across her table. Professor Caldwell, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone stood before her, his posture rigid with military precision. Your papers on extreme long-range ballistics are fascinating reading." Meredith nodded politely. "Thank you, Colonel. Just theoretical models, of course." "Of course," Stone echoed, his tone suggesting otherwise. "Though your equations on atmospheric density variables are remarkably practical for someone who's never pulled a trigger professionally." She met his gaze without flinching. "Mathematics applies everywhere, Colonel. Whether it's classroom theory or battlefield application." "Indeed." Stone leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But there's something about your calculations that feels field-tested. Almost as if you've watched bullets fly at extreme distances yourself." The professor smiled thinly. "I collaborate with military personnel. They provide real-world context for my theoretical work." "Funny thing about theories," Stone continued, gesturing toward the range. "Davis and I just qualified with a shot that matches calculations in your 2015 paper almost exactly. What are the odds?" "Mathematics isn't coincidence, Colonel. It's precision." She stood, shouldering her bag. "If your shots align with my formulas, it simply means the math is sound." Stone's eyes narrowed. "There's a rumor circulating about a CIA operative from 13 years ago. Someone who made an impossible shot in Afghanistan. Someone who disappeared afterward. Military folklore is filled with such legends," Meredith replied evenly. "I'm just a professor who enjoys ballistics mathematics." "For now," he said, the challenge unmistakable in his voice. "See you tomorrow, Professor." Meredith maintained her composed demeanor until she reached the parking lot. As she drove away from Fort Liberty, her trained eyes spotted a black SUV pulling out 3 cars behind her. The vehicle maintained a consistent distance, professional surveillance work, not random following. She took 3 deliberate turns, confirming her suspicion when the automobile mirrored her path exactly. 13 years of peace, shattered in a single day. The mathematics professor gripped the steering wheel tighter, her mind calculating not bullet trajectories now, but escape routes and contingency plans. Someone had connected Professor Caldwell to Mercury, the ghost sniper. Stone's probing questions weren't mere curiosity, they were reconnaissance, and the vehicle behind her wasn't just following, it was hunting. Meredith Mercury Caldwell pulled into the gravel driveway of her cabin, nestled in the pine forest 20 miles from Fort Liberty. The structure's rustic appearance belied its sophisticated security. She performed her standard sweep, a habit from her operative days, and confirmed no new surveillance devices had been planted since morning. Once satisfied, she knelt before the stone fireplace and pressed a hidden panel. The false backing slid away to reveal a biometric safe. Inside lay the tools of her former life: a suppressed Glock, 4 passports with different identities, stacks of various currencies, and a military-grade satellite phone. Her fingers traced the embossed CIA insignia on the device. "Just like riding a bike," she whispered, powering up the secure communication system. The professor typed in her old authentication codes, watching as green confirmation lights flickered across the screen. Her operative designation, Mercury, still registered as active in the system. She frowned when Wells's codename, Jackal, returned an unverified status. "What game are you playing, Jackson?" she muttered. The satellite phone displayed awaiting secure briefing. Meredith scrolled through intelligence reports, confirming what she'd suspected. Axiom Defense Systems had concerning connections to multiple foreign military interests, including several flagged by national security protocols. More troubling were the logs showing Wells had met with Axiom executives 3 times in the past month, always followed by meetings with Lieutenant Colonel Stone within 24 hours. She leaned back against the cabin wall, processing the implications. The pattern was unmistakable. Wells was coordinating between Axiom and Stone, potentially using her as bait to draw out interested parties. The mathematics professor had spent 13 years building her new identity, and now it was unraveling in days. "Damn it, Jackson," she hissed. "You could have just asked." A soft electronic chirp interrupted her thoughts. The perimeter alarm, silent to anyone but her, indicated movement at the eastern boundary of her property. Meredith quickly replaced everything except the Glock, which she tucked into her waistband at the small of her back. She closed the hidden compartment and moved swiftly to the kitchen window. Through the gathering dusk, she spotted a figure moving deliberately through the trees, not the random pattern of a hiker, but the purposeful approach of someone trained. Not Axiom style, they would have sent a team. Her heart rate remained steady, the familiar calm of combat readiness returning like an old friend. Whoever had found her cabin was about to discover that Professor Caldwell and Mercury were one and the same. Meredith Mercury Caldwell lowered her weapon when the intruder stepped into the cabin's light. Not an Axiom operative, but a woman in her mid-20s wearing standard-issue military fatigues, her posture betraying Special Forces training. "Lieutenant Rebecca Chen," the young woman said, her voice steady despite the gun that had been pointed at her seconds before. "5th Special Forces, and you knew my father." She produced a weathered photograph from her pocket and placed it on the table. The image showed a younger Caldwell standing beside a handsome Asian man in tactical gear, both smiling despite the tension evident in their eyes. "Michael," Caldwell whispered, memories flooding back. "You have his eyes." "And his questions," Rebecca replied, her fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "I found this in his personal effects. Classified mission files mention Kyiv and something called the algorithm. They also mention an operative codenamed Mercury." Caldwell's mind raced. Michael Chen had saved her life in Kyiv, taking a bullet meant for her while securing the algorithm. His sacrifice had allowed her to complete the mission and escape with the mathematical breakthrough that could revolutionize warfare. "Your father was a hero," she said, moving toward her hidden safe. "He protected that day in Kyiv wasn't just code. It was a mathematical formula that could eliminate almost all variables in extreme long-range targeting." "The same formula Stone is trying to recreate," Rebecca said, confirming she knew more than she initially let on. The professor nodded. "Axiom thinks they've reconstructed it, but what they have is flawed, dangerous." She retrieved the flash drive from the safe. "This is the original. Your father died protecting it." Rebecca stepped closer. "I deserve to know why." Caldwell froze, raising her hand for silence. Her trained senses had picked up movement outside, the subtle crunch of leaves under tactical boots, the whisper of communication devices. "Down!" she hissed, pulling Rebecca away from the window, just as a beam of light swept across it. Through the gap in the curtains, Caldwell counted 4 operatives in black tactical gear, positioning themselves around the cabin. No military markings, no police identifiers. Axiom's private kill team. "They found me," Caldwell whispered, moving with practiced efficiency toward the hidden panel beneath her bookcase. "There's a tunnel that leads to the forest. Take the flash drive." Rebecca's training kicked in. "What about you?" Caldwell checked her suppressed Glock. "I'll create a diversion. Meet me at the fire tower in Wilson Forest." She pressed the flash drive into the lieutenant's hand. "Your father protected this with his life. Now it's our turn." "They're coming in from the east," Meredith Mercury Caldwell whispered, her instincts shifting seamlessly from professor to operative. She moved with practiced efficiency, guiding Rebecca Chen toward the cabin's back wall. "Push that bookcase hard." Rebecca shoved, revealing a narrow tunnel carved beneath the structure. "My father never mentioned you had escape routes," she said, voice tinged with newfound respect. "Your father never knew everything about me," Caldwell replied, grabbing her suppressed Glock from the hidden safe. "This tunnel leads to a clearing 200 yards into the forest. Head north from there. I'll meet you at the fire tower in Wilson State Forest." The lieutenant hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll buy us time." Caldwell's expression hardened. "Go, now." As Rebecca disappeared into the darkness, Caldwell moved to the window, assessing the tactical operators surrounding her cabin. 5 men, all in black, moving with military precision. Axiom's private force. They were good, but she had been better. She took 3 measured breaths, then fired 4 precise shots through the cabin's side window. The suppressed weapon made little more than a coughing sound, but outside the attackers' vehicles hissed as bullets punctured their tires. Their mobility advantage was gone. Caldwell slipped into the tunnel, pulling the bookcase closed behind her. She crawled through dirt and roots, emerging into the forest just as gunfire erupted at the cabin. The professor moved silently through the trees, her body remembering patterns of movement she hadn't used in 13 years. Halfway to the rendezvous point, she stopped to listen. Multiple teams were converging. She could sense it. The night air carried whispers of radio chatter from different directions. This wasn't just Axiom. The players were multiplying. She reached for her satellite phone, considering activating old emergency protocols, then hesitated. Wells had been her handler, her mentor, but now she couldn't be certain of his loyalties. Was he using her as bait? Was this entire situation his design? The cold reality settled over her as she continued through the darkness. Mercury, the ghost sniper, the legend, would need to fully resurface. The mathematics professor had been a shelter, a hiding place, but that identity could no longer protect her or Rebecca. As she approached the edge of a ravine, Caldwell spotted a black SUV moving slowly along a distant forest road. Through the trees, she glimpsed a familiar silhouette in the passenger seat. Colonel Dmitry Vulov. The Russians were here too. "The algorithm," she whispered to herself. "Everyone wants what they think I have." Caldwell adjusted her course toward the fire tower where Rebecca would be waiting. The night had only begun, and the convergence of her past and present meant only one thing. Mercury would need to make impossible calculations once again, not just with bullets, but with loyalties, secrets, and lives. The fire tower creaked in the night wind, its metal frame a precarious refuge against the darkness of Wilson State Forest. Meredith Mercury Caldwell studied Rebecca Chen's face, searching for traces of Michael in her determined expression. The young lieutenant stood her ground, unflinching under the former operative's scrutiny. "Your father could field strip an M24 in 37 seconds, Meredith said finally, while reciting prime numbers backward. Rebecca's eyes widened. "He taught me to do it in 42. I never knew where he learned that." "From me," Caldwell replied, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. Trust, fragile but real, formed between them as the wind howled around the tower. They huddled over Meredith's satellite phone, piecing together the complex web they'd stumbled into. The Autonomous Weapons Convention was 3 weeks away in Geneva, with nations scrambling to establish dominance before new restrictions took effect. "Axiom isn't selling weapons," Meredith explained, her voice low. "They're selling certainty. The algorithm doesn't just calculate trajectories, it rewrites the rules of what's possible." The lieutenant leaned forward. "My father died for this?" "He died protecting it," Caldwell corrected. "The Kiev algorithm isn't just mathematics. It's a skeleton key to the impossible shot. 2 miles, 3 miles, distances that defy conventional physics." Rebecca processed this, her training as a sniper giving her unique insight into the implications. And in the wrong hands, assassination from untraceable distances. Plausible deniability for any government. The end of safety for anyone, anywhere. Meredith traced a pattern on the dusty floor. "Your father understood that some knowledge changes everything. He chose who should carry that burden." The former CIA operative pulled out her flash drive. "This is the original, uncorrupted. What Stone is using is a reconstruction, dangerous but incomplete." Dawn was approaching, painting the eastern sky with faint brushstrokes of light. Both women knew decisions made now would echo through the coming conflict. "They'll expect us to run," Rebecca said, checking her weapon with practiced efficiency. Meredith nodded, her mind calculating probabilities with the same precision she once used to make impossible shots. "Which is why we returned to Fort Liberty, Hide in plain sight. Back to the competition? The younger woman looked skeptical. Back to where all the players are gathering, Caldwell corrected. Wells, Stone, Axiom, Volov, they're all converging there. And sometimes, she closed her fist around the flash drive. Yeah, the best place to hide is directly in the crosshairs. As they descended the tower, the two women moved with synchronized purpose, one carrying her father's legacy, the other bearing the weight of deadly knowledge. Together, they would return to face the gathering storm at Fort Liberty. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Liberty as Day 2 of the International Sniper Competition began. Meredith Caldwell adjusted her visitor badge, no longer hiding in the background, but openly serving as a mathematical consultant. The transformation from anonymous professor to recognized expert had happened overnight, drawing curious glances from competitors and officials alike. Professor, what's your assessment of the theoretical maximum for an ethical shot? Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone appeared beside her at the range, his question innocent enough to bystanders, but loaded with subtext. That depends on your definition of ethical, Colonel, she replied, maintaining eye contact. Mathematics can predict the path, but judgment determines whether to take the shot. Stone leaned closer. Your papers on extreme ballistics show remarkable, practical insight for an academic. Theory and application often intersect, Meredith answered, her pulse steady despite the probing. Much like your own record attempts. Before Stone could respond, a commotion erupted near the Russian team's station. Colonel Dmitry Volov, ostensibly present as their delegation head, was engaged in a heated exchange with Brigadier General Thomas Rayburn. Though their voices remained controlled, their body language spoke volumes. Interesting timing for Moscow to send their former Kiev station chief, Stone remarked, watching her reaction. Meredith kept her expression neutral, though the mention of Kiev sent a familiar chill down her spine. Volov had been hunting the algorithm for 13 years, and his presence was no coincidence. If you'll excuse me, she said, spotting Rebecca Chen at the edge of the field. As she crossed the parade ground, Meredith noticed the black vehicle parked discreetly near the administration building. Richard Keller from Axiom Defense Systems stood beside it, deep in conversation with two men in suits. Lieutenant, she greeted Rebecca formally, aware of watching eyes. Your grouping this morning was impressive. Thank you, Professor, the young woman replied, her father's determination evident in her stance. Meredith passed her a folded range card. These calculations might help tomorrow. Hidden in the margins was a message. Wells, Memorial Garden, 1600 hours. Later, as competitors broke for equipment checks, Meredith slipped away to the garden. She chose a bench with clear sightlines, knowing Volov would have someone watching. When Colonel Jackson Wells arrived, his casual demeanor belied the tension between them. You're playing a dangerous game, Mercury, he said, using her old call sign. No more dangerous than the one you started, she countered. Volov's here. Axiom's circling. What aren't you telling me? Wells glanced toward a distant figure, one of Volov's men, not even trying to be subtle. The algorithm was never just about distance, he admitted quietly. It's about who controls the next generation of warfare. Meredith nodded slowly. The competition had become a battlefield, and she was once again in the crosshairs. The practice range fell silent as Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone's voice carried across the field. Jessica Miller, a freshman cadet with exceptional mathematical aptitude, stood rigid as Stone dissected her shooting technique. All the equations in the world won't help when the wind shifts in the field, Stone declared, his decorated uniform gleaming under the afternoon sun. This isn't a classroom exercise, Miller. You can't solve your way to a kill shot. Jessica clutched her notebook filled with ballistic calculations, her face flushing with embarrassment as several of Stone's team chuckled. Try it, kid, Stone added dismissively. Call me when your formulas can hit beyond 3,000 meters. Meredith Caldwell, who had been observing quietly from the sidelines, stepped forward. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight as she positioned herself between Stone and the young cadet. Mathematics isn't the enemy of experience, Lieutenant Colonel, she said, her voice calm but carrying authority that silenced the onlookers. It's what makes experience transferable, what makes it science rather than luck. Stone turned to face her, his expression hardening. With all due respect, Professor, there's a difference between theoretical ballistics and putting rounds on target when lives depend on it. Is there? Caldwell challenged. Every shot you've ever taken was governed by the same physics Jessica is studying. You just calculate it intuitively rather than explicitly. Rebecca Chen stood nearby, watching the exchange with growing tension. She recognized the dangerous territory her mentor was entering. Tell you what, Caldwell continued, her eyes never leaving Stone's. Let's settle this empirically. An exhibition match. 4,000 meters. Your experience against my mathematics. A murmur rippled through the gathered soldiers and cadets. Brigadier General Thomas Rayburn, who had been observing from a distance, stepped forward with interest. An interesting proposition, Rayburn said. Lieutenant Colonel Stone has been vocal about breaking records. Stone's jaw tightened. You're not even military anymore, Professor. Consultant status gives her range privileges, Rayburn countered. Unless you're concerned about being outshot by an academic? Stone's pride left him no choice. Tomorrow, 0900. As the crowd dispersed, buzzing with excitement about the unexpected challenge, Chen pulled Caldwell aside. You realize what you've done? She whispered urgently. This isn't just about proving a point anymore. Axiom, the Russians, they'll all be watching. Caldwell nodded, her expression grave. I know, but sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight. She glanced toward Jessica, who was watching them with wide eyes. Besides, someone needed to stand up for her. It's a trap, Chen warned. Yes, Caldwell agreed quietly, but not just for us. The memorial garden stood empty in the fading light as Meredith Mercury Caldwell approached the granite monolith, listing the fallen. Colonel Jackson Wells emerged from behind a cypress tree, his face grim in the shadows. I never wanted you back in this, he said, voice barely above a whisper. But Prometheus left us no choice. Mercury studied her former handler's face. What exactly is Stone testing? They've reconstructed fragments of the Kiev algorithm, Wells admitted. Axiom convinced the Pentagon that an AI-powered targeting system could revolutionize warfare. Stone's the human validation component. They need to prove it works before the Autonomous Weapons Convention next month. You're using him, she said. The colonel's jaw tightened. We're all being used. Axiom's playing both sides, selling to us, the Russians, probably the Chinese too. Vulov, Mercury whispered, the pieces clicking into place. The Russian's presence wasn't coincidental. He was here to evaluate the algorithm's progress firsthand. He knows you're Mercury, Wells confirmed. The moment you stepped onto the range, the clock started ticking. Mercury turned away, watching a group of cadets cross the parade ground. And Rebecca Chen was bringing her into this calculated too? Wells remained silent. Answer enough. I won't let you use her like you used her father, Mercury said. Michael Chen made his choice, Wells countered. Just like you did. Later, in her quarters, Mercury found Rebecca waiting, the young lieutenant's posture rigid with unasked questions. It's time you knew everything, Mercury said, securing the room with a signal jammer from her bag. Your father didn't die in a training accident. Over the next hour, Mercury revealed the truth. Operation Kiev had been a mission to extract a mathematical prodigy who'd created an algorithm that could calculate impossible shots. The Russians had discovered them. Michael Chen had saved both Mercury and the algorithm, taking 3 bullets in the process. He made me promise to complete the mission, Mercury explained, her voice steady despite the weight of memory. His last words were about you. Rebecca's eyes glistened. What did he say? Tell my little girl someday that some equations are worth dying for. Mercury reached for her secure tablet. This is what he protected, the original uncorrupted algorithm. Rebecca studied the complex mathematical formulas. Stone's version has a back door, doesn't it? Mercury nodded. Axiom's version gives whoever controls it an advantage, but it's compromised. Your father died protecting the pure science, not a weapon. What do we do? Rebecca asked. Tomorrow we show them what the real algorithm can do, Mercury replied. And we expose Axiom's game. Your father's legacy deserves nothing less. The lieutenant straightened her shoulders, her father's determination evident in her eyes. Then let's get to work, Professor. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone appeared like a shadow at the edge of the training field, his posture rigid with barely contained anger. The fading evening light cast long shadows across his face as he approached Meredith Caldwell and Rebecca Chen. Professor Caldwell, he said, his voice carrying the edge of someone who'd just discovered a valuable secret. Or should I say, Mercury? Meredith maintained her composure, though her heart rate quickened slightly. That's quite a leap, Colonel. Is it? Stone stepped closer, lowering his voice. Your ballistic calculations are too precise for theory alone. Your stance when you observed the range, military, not academic. And your consultation with Wells wasn't exactly subtle. Rebecca shifted her weight, ready to intervene, but Meredith placed a subtle hand on her arm. Operation Longshot, Stone continued. A ghost sniper with an impossible shot record that's been classified for 13 years. The timing matches your convenient career change to academia. Interesting theory, Meredith replied calmly. But theories require evidence, Lieutenant Colonel. Stone's jaw tightened. Tomorrow's exhibition will provide all the evidence I need. The algorithm you're protecting, Axiom knows it exists. And what exactly do you think you know about algorithms? Meredith asked. Enough to know you're not just some math professor. His gaze shifted to Rebecca. And enough to wonder why Michael Chen's daughter is suddenly your shadow. The mention of her father's name made Rebecca stiffen, but she remained silent as instructed. Tomorrow's match is now a matter of national security, Stone said, backing away. Don't disappoint your audience, Professor. After he disappeared across the parade grounds, Rebecca exhaled sharply. He knows. He suspects, Meredith corrected, guiding them toward her office. But suspicion isn't proof. Inside the sanctuary of equations and academic papers, they spoke freely. Rebecca paced while Meredith sketched calculations on her whiteboard. We can't outshoot him, Rebecca said. Not if he's using the reconstructed algorithm. Meredith smiled for the first time that day. Then we don't compete on his terms. Your electronic warfare training? Can you intercept communications during the match? Rebecca nodded slowly, understanding dawning. You want to know what data they're feeding him? While I introduce a mathematical trap only the original algorithm would recognize, Meredith confirmed, writing a complex equation. When he takes his shot using their flawed version, the error will compound at extreme distance, Rebecca finished, a smile spreading across her face. Exactly. We won't beat them with better shooting. We'll beat them with better math, Rebecca said. As night fell over Fort Liberty, 2 generations of Guardians prepared to protect a secret that could reshape modern warfare, not with bullets, but with brilliance. The morning of the exhibition match dawned with unusual clarity, as if nature itself wanted to witness the historic confrontation. Fort Liberty's extended range had been transformed overnight, bleachers erected, dignitaries seated, media positioned. Meredith Mercury Caldwell arrived alone, carrying only a small notebook filled with equations that made little sense to anyone but her. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone was already there, surrounded by his Phantom team, the custom rifle gleaming under the morning sun. The professor nodded briefly to Brigadier General Thomas Rayburn, who stood with Richard Keller from Axiom. She noted Colonel Dmitry Volov among the Russian contingent, his eyes following her every move. Ladies and gentlemen, announced the Rangemaster, today's exhibition will test the theoretical limits of long-range precision shooting. 4,213 meters, beyond any confirmed kill in history. Stone went first. The crowd fell silent as he settled behind his rifle. Davis whispering wind calculations in his ear. Through her binoculars, Caldwell could see him inputting data into the targeting system. Axiom's reconstructed algorithm at work. When Stone fired, 4 seconds passed before the impact flag waved. The target showed a hit just 2 inches from center. The crowd erupted, records shattered before their eyes. "Beat that, Professor," Stone said, stepping away with undisguised satisfaction. Caldwell approached the firing position with measured calm. Rebecca Chen stood nearby, ostensibly as an observer, but her fingers moved subtly over her tablet, executing their planned countermeasures against any electronic interference. "No spotter?" Rayburn asked, surprised. "I am my own spotter, General," she replied, settling behind the rifle. The mathematics professor closed her eyes momentarily, visualizing the original Kiev algorithm, the one she had protected for 13 years. She made 3 minute adjustments to the scope, factoring variables Stone had missed: barometric pressure gradients, the Coriolis effect at extreme distance, even the subtle curvature of the Earth. Her first shot struck 3 inches left of center. "Calibrating," she murmured, making a quarter-turn adjustment. Her second shot landed 1 inch from the bullseye. The crowd held its breath as she prepared for the final shot. Wells watched intently from the back. Keller leaned forward. Volov's hand tightened around his binoculars. When Caldwell pulled the trigger the 3rd time, she knew before the bullet landed. 4 seconds later, the range officer's voice cracked with astonishment. Perfect center mass, bullseye at 4,213 meters. The stunned silence that followed spoke volumes. Stone's face hardened with realization. The military officials exchanged alarmed glances, and somewhere in the crowd, a young female cadet smiled as the words, "Try it, kid," took on an entirely new meaning. In a secure underground facility beneath Fort Liberty, Meredith Mercury Caldwell stood before a panel of military and intelligence officials. The evidence was irrefutable. Lines of code displayed on the screen revealed a sophisticated Russian backdoor embedded within Axiom's reconstructed algorithm. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. "This isn't just corporate espionage," Caldwell explained, her voice steady. "Every shot taken using this compromised system would have transmitted targeting data directly to Colonel Volov's team." General Marshall, a silver-haired figure whose name rarely appeared in official records, nodded gravely. "Professor Caldwell has confirmed what we suspected. Axiom has been playing both sides." He turned to Lieutenant Colonel Stone, whose face had hardened into a mask of controlled anger at the realization he'd been manipulated. "The program requires a complete reset," the general continued. "Caldwell will lead research and development. Stone, you'll command military implementation. Lieutenant Chen will serve as technical liaison between the teams." Stone met Caldwell's gaze across the table. "I still don't trust theoretical models over field experience," he said, "but I can't argue with what I saw on that range." The professor smiled slightly. "Mathematics doesn't lie, Colonel. People do." In the months that followed, Fort Liberty became the center of a classified renaissance in precision targeting. Caldwell converted her academic office into a secure workspace where she and Rebecca Chen spent countless hours refining the original algorithm her father had helped protect. "The numbers are just tools," Caldwell explained one evening as they worked. "What your father understood, what made him irreplaceable, was knowing when to trust the math and when to trust human instinct." Rebecca's fingers moved across the keyboard, implementing adjustments. "He never told my mother what he really did," she said quietly. "I always thought he was just a logistics officer." "He saved countless lives," Caldwell replied, placing a hand on her shoulder, "including mine." By spring, their work had transformed the sniper program. Even Stone acknowledged the breakthrough during a demonstration for General Rayburn. Watching as Rebecca calculated variables that would have been impossible just months earlier. "Try it, kid," he said, echoing his earlier taunt, but this time with respect in his voice as he handed her the rifle. What had begun as mockery had become a badge of honor among the new generation of snipers trained under Caldwell's guidance. The phrase spread through the ranks, a challenge to push beyond perceived limitations. As Caldwell watched her students master the delicate balance between mathematical precision and human judgment, she finally found peace with her past. Mercury's legacy would continue, not as a ghost in the shadows, but as knowledge passed down to protect rather than destroy.